So I want to rattle off a few buzzwords in the technology space, see if any of these resonate with you, see if there are terms you've heard, see if there are terms that you've maybe fallen victim to in believing, or maybe you believe some of these terms. I'm curious to hear your thoughts here. I'm going to read off a few of these here. The first is technical debt. It's a term that's often used to describe customizations and obsolete technologies that we haven't yet replaced, but we're going to have to at some point in the future. So therefore, it's labeled as technical debt. And that's something that I think every organization or a lot of organizations are aspiring to eradicate, is this concept of technical debt. So that's one term, technical debt. Is that a term you've heard? Is that one you buy into? Do you prescribe to the notion of removing technical debt in your organization? There's also future-proof. A lot of us are aspiring to future-proof our organizations, and software vendors, big system integrators are selling this concept of future-proofing your organization, as though investing in technology that is good for today, somehow that's going to make you immune to the future. I'm not sure I know what they're trying to say, but I'm not sure how that one makes any sense. But love to hear from you. Future-proof. Is that a concept you buy into? Modernization. That's another one that I think that one's a little bit more innocuous. It's a little less misleading. Yeah, sure. Let's modernize our technology stack if we're outdated, running on legacy systems, mainframe systems, old client server, on-prem systems, whatever it is. Sure, maybe we want to modernize and get to a more modern architecture, more modern technology stack. Clean core. That's another one. It's big in the SAP community, and other ERP vendors are using terminology similar to this. The whole concept of keeping the core of your ERP system standard, keeping it untouched, unscathed. You're not customizing it, you're not changing it, you're not breaking anything, you're just leaving it. You're adopting to the technology, basically. So that's clean core. And then related to clean core is this concept of fit to standard. That's another one. It's about, how do I fit my business to the standard technology so I don't have to change the technology? And as a technologist, if I'm an architect or just an IT professional, I love the concept of clean core and fit to standard, because it makes for a cleaner architecture. It makes for our jobs in IT easier. But the question is, does that solve our business problems, or is that enough to solve our business problems? And usually those two things are in conflict. And actually, if you look at all four of those terms, or all five of those terms I just mentioned, technical debt, future-proof, modernization, clean core, fit to standard, these are commonly used terms that are very related to what we're going to talk about in today's episode, because we're going to talk about shadow IT and how shadow IT exists. And I think it's really important to back up and understand why shadow IT exists. Why do spreadsheets exist? Why are we creating custom apps to solve problems in our business rather than using a more standardized solution that's off the shelf, that's sanctioned by our corporate IT group? It's easy to cast stones and use these buzzwords as proof or evidence that we should be eradicating shadow IT. And a lot of us are aspiring to get rid of shadow IT, but a lot of us also, I would say most of us, are probably not taking the time to understand why does the shadow IT exist in the first place. In other words, maybe shadow IT is the symptom and not the problem. And that's something that we want to dive into here today. We've got a lot to cover. We're going to talk about shadow IT. We're going to talk about some of the court cases and the legal issues that are being faced by both SAP and Microsoft. We've got some updates on that front. We've got a lot more we're going to get into today. It's episode 285 of Transformation Ground Control. Thanks for being here.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 285. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital strategy, including people, process, technology, all the different components of digital strategy and digital transformation that you need to know without the vendor spin. We're here just to tell it like it is and to give you an objective view of the digital transformation and technology space. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm your host today. I'm also the CEO of a company called Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their evaluation and digital strategies, as well as implementing their said digital strategy. So if you'd like to learn more about us, be sure to go to thirdstage-consulting.com and feel free to reach out to me if you ever want to talk about your transformation projects or bounce around ideas, brainstorm ideas, get a second opinion, whatever you want. Feel free to reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. And in the meantime, I'm excited for today's episode, sharing with you some of the topics we're going to cover here today. We're going to get to this concept of shadow IT here in just a moment. And I open up the segment with a few terms that are commonly used. I mentioned the terms technical debt, future-proof, modernization, clean core, and fit to standard. And the reason I bring up these 5 terms is because I think those 5 terms are good descriptions of what companies are aspiring to with their digital transformation initiatives. But I think those same 5 terms also point to a problem, which is partially related to expectations, expectations that we are somehow going to fully modernize and fully future-proof our businesses, fully eradicate technical debt. And so there's misaligned expectations that are created by those terms. But those terms also are indicative of why shadow IT exists in the first place. When we look at, for example, the concept of clean core and fit to standard, those are 2 of the terms I just mentioned at the top of the podcast. Clean core and fit to standard are terms that are, or concepts, I should say, philosophies around how to deploy technology, which would suggest that you deploy the vanilla software the way it was built without customizing or breaking anything, which on the surface sounds great. I mean, why would you want to break something, or why would you want to overcomplicate something, or why would you not want to use something off the shelf if you can? But the problem is most off the shelf software isn't going to fit the needs or the full needs of your business 100%. And that's where the challenge is. It might get you 80 or 90% of the way there, but that last 10 to 20% that a core cloud system can't handle, that's what creates the difficulty. That's what creates the complexity. That's what sort of pokes a hole in the whole concept of clean core and fit to standard, because now we're trying to force fit, or at the very least, we're trying to decide if we should force fit our business into the technology, or do we want to force fit the technology into the business, or do we want to go find a third-party solution that plugs into the core enterprise stack that we have, or do we want to change our processes in some other way? So there's a lot of decisions that have to be made around that. And the concept of clean core, fit to standard, that points to and is the root cause of why shadow IT exists, in my opinion, why shadow IT is going to get worse in years to come. It's not going to get better. And so that's what we're going to get into here in just a moment, after I cover a couple of news topics in the industry. We're going to talk about shadow IT, why it exists, how it's not always a bad thing. There's some good in shadow IT, and it's important to understand what it really is, what the organizational behavior is that leads us to shadow IT. That is really important to understand, because in this industry, we spend way too much talking about how to get rid of shadow IT, and we spend way too much time casting or framing shadow IT as a problem. And I would submit to you that shadow IT is not the problem. It's a symptom of a problem. And the symptom, and this is a spoiler alert for those that are here selling software, or if you're part of an ecosystem that focuses on one software vendor, one type of technology, the spoiler alert is that technology that's supposed to be so future-proof and it's supposed to be eliminating technical debt, that same technology is what's creating more shadow IT. And it may sound counterintuitive, but I'll explain why that is here today. There's a whole psychology behind it. There's a whole operational reality behind why shadow IT exists and why it's not getting any better. It's going to get worse. And I predict that spreadsheets will have their peak years in years to come. I think spreadsheets and the proliferation of spreadsheets actually have not hit their peak yet. And I'm going to explain why that is here today. And just to give you a preview, it has to do with 2 trends in the industry, 2 similar but semi-contradictory trends, which is cloud ERP systems and AI. Those 2 things combined are actually going to create more shadow IT, more spreadsheets, more custom apps that are unsanctioned and ungoverned by the corporate IT higher-ups within an organization. So I'll talk about all that here today. I'm going to get your feedback. I'm going to take questions. Hopefully we have a good debate on that here today. But what I want to do in the meantime, before we get to that, is I want to share with you a couple news stories here that I think are super important and relevant to the industry here. I'm going to share with you here, or show you a couple of headlines here just in the last couple of weeks. And that is this concept or these 2 stories related to SAP and Microsoft, two different cases. Both are taking place in Europe. And as we'll talk about here with SAP, it's actually there's a related case happening in the US as well. But in Europe, there's a lot happening from a regulatory and legal perspective as it relates to SAP and Oracle. And I would argue this is a much bigger issue than just SAP or Oracle. I mean, SAP and Oracle are the two biggest, or two of the biggest ERP enterprise technology providers in the world. So it makes sense that they're sort of leading on the leading edge of the regulatory issues happening in the industry. But it's something that will affect all the vendors at some point, in my opinion. And it certainly can and should be a consideration top of mind for any leader that's investing in technology, that's investing in a digital transformation. This is stuff you have to know and you should really be following, because there's a certain amount of uncertainty in these legal cases. But despite the uncertainty, what I think it does is it should create a certain amount of concern as a buyer, ensuring that you find ways to navigate the uncertainty related to these cases. I'll explain what I mean by that here. So first, let's talk about SAP. There's been cases in Europe. The EU has had a couple cases. One in particular related to third party maintenance and support. And I've talked about that a lot in this podcast. And that recently, SAP just settled with the EU on their third party support tactics. They've made some concessions and they've changed some of their business practices, at least in the EU, as it relates to third party support and maintenance. And even if you're not in the EU, I highly encourage you to look into that, do the research, look at this podcast from a couple weeks ago where we talk about that third party case in the EU. If not, just prompt AI or Google it or whatever, get an update on it, because it's really important. And I think if you're outside the EU, you need to know what's happening in the EU, because I think you need to use that as leverage as a buyer, because you need to use the leverage that SAP has, or that the EU has imposed on SAP, I guess you could say, in a way that favors buyers. And I think there's as an end customer, there's some concessions that SAP has made in the EU as an agreement or a settlement with the EU. It's not binding outside the EU. So if you're in the Middle East or the Americas or wherever, it may not be binding there, but you do have leverage. You have a precedent now to point to say, look, we know in Europe this is happening, so we expect the same here as a buyer in Dubai or wherever you might be. So be sure to check that out. But that's not what I'm going to talk about here today. What I want to talk about today is a different case in Germany. And this is I actually kind of laughed, but was a little jarred by this when I first saw it. And I didn't know, I'm not familiar with the German regulatory regime, because I'm based in the United States and I just don't have much experience with the German regulatory environment. But apparently there's a federal cartel office in Germany. Now I suspect, and now I haven't, to be fair and be clear, I have not researched what exactly the scope of the federal cartel office is. But when I hear cartel, I think cartels, like, cartels, they're doing illegal stuff, drugs and selling illegal stuff. I don't think that's what the Germans mean by a federal cartel. I think they mean monopolies and anti-competitive behavior, I'm guessing, is what the purpose of the federal cartel office is. But the whole point here is that the German federal cartel office had been looking into, or potentially considering, formal proceedings against SAP for abuse of power. And when I say power, I mean, competitive power. And it was related to ERP data and integration to third-party systems. So in this case, Germany is saying, or at least the German government is saying, there's not enough evidence here for us to launch a further investigation into SAP for the way they're allegedly limiting data for use with third-party applications. Now, I've been hypercritical of SAP on their API policy that they rolled out a couple months ago. I don't like it. I do have a bias. I'll be completely honest and candid here. I have a bias for pro end customer actions, and anything that runs counter to that, I am going to have an allergic reaction to. And I did have an allergic reaction to SAP's API policy, because you can tell what they're doing. They're trying to force third-party, or they're trying to force customers to limit third-party use of data and integration with SAP, because they want you to invest and double down on the SAP ecosystem. And they have a lot of leverage in the relationship. SAP has a lot of leverage in the commercial relationships with their customers, and they use it to their advantage, which is their prerogative. But you as a buyer, you have to figure out how you can counter that, and you've got to take some of that leverage back, in my opinion. So anyway, back to the data privacy, or not the data privacy, the data ownership issue and the data accessibility and portability issue. Germany is saying, no, actually, there's not enough data or there's not enough evidence to support that SAP is limiting use. So they've essentially said that there's enough options in the marketplace and there's enough ways for people to get at or access data in SAP that it's not an abuse of power for SAP. So that was a win for SAP for sure in Germany. Now, first, the other thing, in addition to having finding the slight humor in the term federal cartel office, one of the other things that stood out here is that it's in Germany. SAP is based in Germany. It's one of the biggest companies in Germany. So I don't know if there's a bias there. I have no evidence to support this hypothesis, by the way. So this is not a legal statement. But my question is, could that have created some sort of bias? Is Germany maybe a little more lenient on SAP because it's such a big, important driver of their economy? I don't know. If that was in another country, or I guess we'll just have to see what other countries and what other regulatory bodies decide on this, because this isn't over yet. I mean, just because Germany came to their conclusion, other courts and other regulatory bodies will probably come to different conclusions. And like I said, the EU and SAP did just recently settle on it's a different topic, but it all just kind of circles around this whole concept, in my opinion, of vendor lock and vendor control and customer control. Who should have the more control in the commercial relationship? In this case, SAP has a big win in Germany. I think SAP did have to give up a lot in their settlement with the EU. Some might say maybe they should have given up more. Some might say maybe it was too lenient. We'll see, what happens over time. But despite that, there's still legal issues that SAP is facing, or still legal allegations against SAP. One is the Celonis case, which if you haven't followed that, that's a really important one. That is one that involves the business process mining company called Celonis. They had historically had access to SAP data. So Celonis is a business process mining tool that could crawl into SAP and analyze transaction volumes and workflows and all that stuff, which is what business process mining tools do. So historically, Celonis could integrate with SAP, but then SAP bought a competing business process mining tool called Signavio. And then once they bought Signavio, then they disconnected or what do you call it? Limited or cut off the access that Celonis could have into SAP. So Celonis is suing, crying foul, saying, "Hey, that's anti-competitive," and we'll see where that goes. But that is headed to trial at the end of this year in the U.S. So we'll see what happens there. So this is far from resolved. I mean, you can see the bottom takeaway here on the slide in front of you. SAP may have scored a regulatory win in Germany, but the ERP data ownership and interoperability disputes remain unresolved. And so if you are a buyer, this is where you've just got to be aware that this is unresolved. There's uncertainty related to this. If you're investing in SAP or any other ERP vendor, you just have to have really clear understanding of what you can and can't control, what contractual limitations you have to access your data or to have interoperable systems with your core ERP system. Now, the other case involves Microsoft, and this is in the UK. They received extra time. Microsoft received extra time while preparing to seek permission to appeal to the UK Supreme Court in its dispute with Value Licensing. So the reseller, in this case Value Licensing, alleges that Microsoft used commercial incentives and contract terms to discourage resale of perpetual Office licensee and push customers towards Microsoft D365 or Microsoft 365 subscriptions. So again, this gets into the whole, using commercial pricing and commercial pressure to get customers to a more profitable solution for you, the seller. That's what's at stake here. And this could influence how enterprise vendors move customers from perpetual licenses to subscription models. And I think this is an interesting case because it's putting front and center the elephant in the room, which is that when you move to the cloud, you're moving from a perpetual license that you pay for once, and maybe you pay some very light maintenance longer term. Pay for it once until you decide you want to replace it. You're replacing that model with a locked in perpetual subscription cost that never goes away. It only increases over time. So that's the big question. And that's, again, something to keep in mind. If you're moving to the cloud, you're essentially moving from owning your car to leasing your car. And that lease payment never goes away. The lease payment's going to only increase. I can't imagine a world where vendors are going to decide they're going to cut costs and pass along the savings to customers. I don't think that's something that'll happen. I guess anything's possible. I guess if you, for a startup or a highly competitive vendor, they might want to. But in general, I think it's safe to say if you're on Microsoft or SAP or Oracle, any of these big ERP cloud provider solutions, you're going to pay more over time, not less. Now, it might be justifiable. It might be that you get a ton of business value out of it. That's great. If you do, good on you. But the fact of the matter is, you're not going to save money in your spend, your IT spend, as a result of moving to the cloud. It's just going to cost more. And I think that debate's been pretty well settled. So the case here with Microsoft, though, is interesting because that is going to the Supreme Court. It's still going. It's still a unresolved regulatory issue. But again, I think the bigger question here that it poses is what do your costs look like longer term? And should you be, at what point does commercial pressure, like Microsoft and SAP and other vendors are applying, at what point does commercial pressure become anti-competitive? At what point does it become unfair for the buyer? I would submit to you, and I've said this before, I say it a lot, if this industry were a business to consumer facing sort of industry, I think it would have been highly regulated decades ago. But because we're dealing with a B2B environment, regulators and just the average citizen in any country generally isn't going to feel bad for a big corporation that gets screwed by a software vendor. I mean, it's just not top of mind. It's not something that keeps many of us up late at night as end consumers. But if we were doing if we were applying these same tactics to a consumer facing, like end consumer facing situation, like if we were a bank or if we were anyone selling to direct end consumers, I assure you this industry and these tactics in this industry would not have lasted nearly as long as they have. But we're just in the last couple of years, starting to see regulators get interested in perk their ears a bit more in terms of what's happening in the industry, which I think is good. I hate to say it because I don't like, just my political beliefs don't support big government or over-regulation, but this industry is just so out of control. It's been the wild, wild west for too long, and I think this industry has proven it can't regulate itself. I had a professor in grad school when I was getting my MBA who had one of the most profound statements. He was teaching it was a class that was business law and business ethics. It was a combination of both law and ethics in this MBA class, and I remember him saying, like, the best way to deal with regulation is to avoid it by regulating yourself. So if you don't want the government to regulate you, then just don't do stuff that makes the government want to regulate you. And I think that's where the industry is right now. The government is testing, in my opinion, maybe not consciously, but essentially what we're doing and what this industry is doing is it's testing the limits. How far can I push? And I think we're finding out right now how far vendors can push, how much leverage can or should they have. I think the blowback and the pushback we're about to see for this industry is yet to come. I think there's a reckoning that's going to come. I think some of these decisions that vendors are making right now are very short-sighted. I think it's going to harm them long term. I think it's going to put them at a strategic weakness. They're acting like, a lot of these big incumbents in the ERP space are acting like the failed tech companies of the past that failed to move fast enough and adjust fast enough to a changing market. And I like to compare incumbent ERP vendors like SAP, maybe to a lesser degree Microsoft, because they're not just an ERP company. They also have other technologies that are, outside the world of ERP. But I think when you look at just the big ERP vendors like SAP, maybe Oracle, and others, I think they're acting like companies act right at the beginning of the end. And so what I mean by that is you look at, I can't help but I always think of the BlackBerry. If any of you have seen him, there's a really good, it's not a documentary, but it's what's it called when it's a reenactment of a true story, not a biopic. It's kind of like a biopic, but it's based on a company, not a person. But it's about BlackBerry and it's about the rise and fall of BlackBerry. But one of the not cool things, but one of the most telling parts in the story is at the end, toward the end of the movie, when they're telling the story, it was like BlackBerry's riding high, and then Apple announces the iPhone back in whatever it was. I think it was 2006. And so at the time, BlackBerry was the dominant smartphone provider. Apple announces they're going to come out with a phone of their own. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting and weird that Apple's coming out with a phone. I didn't know what to make of it, but BlackBerry was convinced that they were going to fail. They're like, yeah, Apple's going to fail because they're coming out with a phone that doesn't have a keyboard on it. And if you're not old enough to remember, BlackBerries are the devices that had an actual physical keyboard on it. And then when the iPhone came out, it was like, wow, there's no keyboard. You just touch the screen to type instead of an actual keyboard. And the BlackBerry leadership, the BlackBerry executives couldn't even fathom a phone without a keyboard, and they scoffed at it. They literally scoffed at it and thought it was a joke until it wasn't a joke, and Apple took off, and BlackBerry is still around, but it's not nearly as prevalent as it used to be. So when I saw that story, and when I saw, as I think and watch what's happening here in the industry, I can't help but think of that story of BlackBerry. And I think that's, in my opinion, I think that's where a lot of these incumbent ERP vendors are right now. They are the BlackBerry of 2026. And some will respond better than others. I mean, I think, like I said, I think Microsoft is in a strategic position where they can probably adapt better because they've got Copilot, they've got Office 365, they've got their tethers, they're tethered into organizations well beyond just ERP systems. Whereas like SAP, I think they've got a strategic problem on their hands. Oracle does too, although Oracle is diversified enough where they've got databases and AI type stuff that they're investing in that's independent of ERP. So maybe they're okay too. But when I look at some of these these monolithic incumbent ERP vendors, I think it might be the beginning of the end. And I think the regulatory and legal issues that they're facing now, as it gets resolved in the next few years, will largely decide whether I'm right or wrong and where this industry ends up heading. But love to hear from you. What do you think? What do you think the future holds for incumbent monolithic ERP vendors, SAP and others? Are they here to stay? Are they in a good spot? Are they doing the right thing? Are they doing right by their customers? Are they in a position where they're really going to ride out the changes and be on the forefront of it, or are they going to get left behind, or somewhere in between? I'd love to hear your feedback. So good discussion so far. And I'm going to talk more about shadow IT here in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break. We'll talk about shadow IT and why it exists, why it's not always a bad thing, why it could actually be a good thing. But regardless of whether or not you like shadow IT, it's not going anywhere. It's going to be around for a long time. In fact, we're going to see more shadow IT in the coming years, not less. And I'll explain why that is. And I'll have what I hope will be a healthy debate with you about that. So stick around. We've got a lot more to cover in this episode of Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you only attend one event this year, make it Digital Stratosphere 2026. It's our annual flagship conference. It's going to be September 9th through 11th in Denver, Colorado, the same location as we held it last year. It's 3 days where digital leaders, ERP practitioners, and transformation experts come together for no-spin, vendor-neutral conversations on ERP, AI, and digital transformation. There's no marketing fluff. There's no pay-to-play sponsorships, just real practitioners sharing real lessons. Go to thirdstage-consulting.com/stratosphere to learn more and register. Tickets are limited, and these always sell out, and I'd love to see you there.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
What's one function in your business where you are heavily dependent on spreadsheets? I'd love to hear your feedback here in the chat. If you don't mind, just dropping in the chat. What function is it? Inventory management? Is it production planning? Is it your pseudo CRM system you've designed in a shadow system of some sort, whether it be a spreadsheet or an Access database or something along those lines? We'd love to hear your feedback on that. Now, I'd love to hear from you. And while you're answering that question, I want to talk about first of all, what is shadow IT? It's a commonly used term. It's something that I think is becoming an increasingly used buzzword and term in the industry. And essentially what shadow IT is it's the use of technology or applications or systems that weren't necessarily sanctioned or approved by corporate IT, but they're systems that are commonly used to create workarounds or to fill gaps or deficiencies with the current technology stack. So for example, you probably have that person in your company, or maybe it's a group of people, maybe it's multiple people in your organization who create these elaborate spreadsheets that pull data from different sources, email chains from multiple systems, and they create these spreadsheets to oftentimes provide analytics or reporting. So oftentimes, since the data doesn't live in one place, we create a spreadsheet to put it all in one place so we can get the information we need. And so that's essentially what shadow IT is. It's the end user. It's the people at the front line, typically using or creating applications that are meant to fill a void or fill a gap, or really just to help them do their jobs. Now, as IT practitioners and technologists and consultants, we oftentimes frown upon shadow IT and we view it as a very bad thing. But I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, because shadow IT usually exists because something is deficient in the current tool set that companies have. So that's essentially what shadow IT is. We've talked for years about how technology is deployed in organizations oftentimes to eliminate or to minimize shadow IT. But what we're seeing lately is it's actually increasing the use of shadow IT. And I'll talk about what some of those reasons are here in just a moment. But when there's a few different angles of shadow IT, it could be a spreadsheet that's reconciling two systems that weren't properly integrated. It could be just an app that was used on the corporate card. A lot of times you'll see companies now that are using different AI tools that are inconsistent across the organization. So you'll have people that are trying different tools and subscribing to different tools that will help them do their jobs or help them do their jobs better, but no one's necessarily approving or directing the employees to use those tools. It could be a custom tool that an analyst built over a weekend. A lot of times we're seeing that a lot more now, where someone goes into Claude and they built a little application that helps them fill some sort of need that the current systems don't. And then, like I mentioned, the AI is the other one, the AI subscriptions. And subscriptions to really any technology are commonly some of the different types of shadow ITs that exist. So, what we want to discuss here today is that it's not that shadow IT is bad necessarily. It's that we're trying to fix the wrong thing. A lot of times when we're looking at shadow IT, we're trying to focus on how do we get rid of shadow IT rather than understanding why does the shadow IT exist in the first place. And that's the dangerous part, I think, of being a consultant or being a person that comes in with a predefined prescription or a solution to a technology strategy or technology need. And that is to say, look, you've got all these spreadsheets. We need to get rid of the spreadsheets. And maybe that is the end goal, but we're asking the wrong question, or we're analyzing or trying to accomplish the wrong thing from the wrong angle. We're coming at it from the perspective of how do we eliminate it, rather than let's really dig in and understand why that spreadsheet exists and try to figure out a solution that allows you to survive or build your company without the shadow IT. So I want to make sure to define shadow IT clearly, because it's coming a buzzword and buzzwords lose their meaning pretty quick. So just to simply summarize it, shadow IT is any technology, application, or system being used in your business that corporate IT didn't sanction or approve. So it's a workaround, it's the gap filler. And some examples of what this looks like in practice would be, that elaborate spreadsheet that pulls data from multiple systems and multiple email chains because the data doesn't live in one place. It could be the reconciliation file bridging two systems that were never properly integrated. It could be that app that someone bought on a corporate card. They just expensed it to the company and they started using it on their own. It could be the AI subscription that no one approved. It could be that ChatGPT license or subscription, or the Claude subscription. It could be a custom tool that an analyst built or that a business user built because they could use Claude or some other AI tool. So here's the reframe, and it's really the whole point of today's episode. We keep asking, how do we eliminate shadow IT, which is the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, why does it exist in the first place? Now, it may sound familiar. You may be telling yourself, well, why are we spending our time spinning our wheels trying to understand why shadow IT exists when we know we just want to get rid of shadow IT? Well, if you really want to get rid of shadow IT, you have to understand why it exists. I mean, so that's my answer to you. Secondly, even if you don't agree with that, you do have to do that from a pure change management perspective. I want to come back to that point here later in the conversation. But if you go straight to elimination of shadow IT, you throw away the only piece of evidence you had about where your systems were failing in the first place. So instead of just saying, why don't we just get rid of shadow IT? Let's understand why it exists so we can find a solution to address the fact that shadow IT existed in the first place. And that's the key, is the shadow IT almost always exists for a reason. Usually a real limitation in the current stack is what causes shadow IT. Sometimes it could be a change management or training issue. It could be resistance to using a new system. Yes, that could be. And sometimes it is. But even if it is, you still need to address it. So, okay, if you understand that's what it is, then great. Do more training. Get more into the human side of the adoption. And if it's something more than that, then you need to understand what it is. But more often than not, it's not just a change management or training issue. More often than not, it's an operational fit issue. The software and the way the business actually works don't line up. And when that happens, people don't just sit there and fail. They're going to be creative, they're going to be ingenious, and they're going to build what they need to get their job done. I know some of you might be cringing at the idea of a spreadsheet being ingenious or that a manual workaround being ingenious, but it really is. It may not be sexy, it may not be cool, but the fact that you have employees that can figure it out despite the fact that their systems suck, you should be celebrating that and saying, hey, we've got a good team that has figured out some pretty cool stuff. It may not be what we want longer term going forward, but kudos to you for building something that worked. And now let's work together to find the next version or the next iteration of that versus let's find a way to get rid of that ingenious stuff that you built over time. And organizations and leaders wonder why people resist change. That's why. It's because largely because we're telling them they suck. We don't like your solution. It's technical debt. We need to modernize. Shadow IT is a bad thing. We need to future proof, and that's not future proof. We can't scale the company with the solution you built. Okay. Yeah, some of that is true, but that's not, you don't lead with that, when you're trying to convince people that they should change. So before you kill the spreadsheet, you want to understand the spreadsheet because it's telling something that you can't learn any other way. Oftentimes it's a limitation of the current systems. Usually shadow IT has a reason it exists. You may argue that it shouldn't exist. You may argue that you have other tools in your current ERP system or your current tech stack that could do the same thing the spreadsheet does. Maybe it's a change management issue, yes, but oftentimes it's more of an operational issue. It's that the software and the operations don't fit. So rather than just being a victim of a system that doesn't work for your needs, people are human, they're ingenious, and they're creative, and they'll create the solutions that allow them to do their jobs. Regardless or despite the fact that they might have limited technologies. So that's really why it exists. And I think it's important to frame shadow IT a little bit differently. And the other thing too, this is something that never gets talked about in the industry. And that is when we sit here and frown upon shadow IT systems and talk about how terrible it is and we need to get rid of shadow IT, we're in some ways unintentionally critiquing or negatively criticizing the people that created the shadow IT. And again, we have to understand that the shadow IT usually doesn't exist because someone just wants to be a pain in the ass and create a new spreadsheet to make everyone's lives more difficult. Usually they're creating the spreadsheets because they are trying to get their job done and they're trying to make do with what they do and don't have. And so from a change management perspective, if I come in as a consultant and tell you that your shadow IT is a problem, but in reality, you've created the shadow IT solution that's held the business together for 10 or 15 years, you're going to take that a bit personally, and you're going to suddenly resist that change because I'm coming in and calling your baby ugly and telling you how terrible it is. You've got shadow IT and you need to get rid of it versus, hey, that's pretty cool. You created your own tool. Let's figure out a way to move that tool into a more central or more standard technology that's more integrated with the rest of the company. Those are two different approaches. It may sound the same, but that nuance, that difference is really important from a change management perspective, as well as just more from a general technology strategy perspective. So one important point that I want to highlight is that when you tell a company that their shadow IT is a problem, you're really telling your best people that they are the problem. And you may not mean that, but that's the way it's perceived. I mean, you have to think of it from the shadow IT person's perspective. When you've got someone who has taken pride in building a solution for, to work around their ERP system, they're going to take that personally. They're going to take pride in that. And when you start knocking it and saying that's a problem, that's not future proof, it's not scalable, that's technical debt, whatever, when you put labels that are negative on it, you're actually putting a negative label on the person that built it. And you have to think about who actually builds shadow IT. It's not the disengaged employee coasting to retirement that doesn't care. It's the person that knows where all the bodies are buried. They're the ones with the tribal knowledge, the ones that understand how operations really work better than anyone in the building. And they're the ones who cared enough to solve a problem that nobody gave them a tool for. So that's a really important reframe, I would say, and this goes for not only leaders within organizations, but consultants. I've seen so many consultants with this sort of arrogant or condescending attitude coming in saying, hey, Eric is the problem because he created a spreadsheet, and that, it's almost like they label him and his tool as the problem. And what I'm saying is that's not the problem. That is actually a pretty healthy reaction to the real problem, which is your systems suck. Well, let's just call a spade, or the technology just can't handle the needs, or you haven't fully understood what's going on the front lines when you deployed the previous software. So why don't you do it differently this time by understanding why it exists so you can deploy technology that works? So that's important, because you don't want an employee to hear a message that the thing I built that has held this thing together for the last 15 years is garbage and we need to get rid of it. That's not a winning message. You just called their baby ugly, and now you've created a change resistor out of the single most knowledgeable person on the project. So that's probably not what you want. That would not be my recommendation of what implementation best practice or change management best practice would be. But there's a version of that conversation that costs you nothing and it gains everything. It sounds more like, you've been running a critical part of this business on a spreadsheet for 15 years. That's impressive. Let's figure out how we move what you built into something more central and integrated, so the whole company benefits and you're not the only safety net. And the key there is, how can we take this great stuff that you've built and turn it into something that can benefit the whole company? Now all of a sudden we've shifted this from a conversation of your solution sucks to actually your solution is pretty good, and let's figure out how to take it to the next level. And it's we end up in the same place, but with a very different outcome when we do that. One is going to create an ally who helps you migrate the logic, instead of the other, which is to create an adversary who rebuilds a spreadsheet 3 months after go live. And they will. That's what's going to happen with those people. They may, even if they don't sabotage the project intentionally, they're going to go back to their spreadsheets. They're going to build something to work around whatever you just built, partly because you didn't understand it. You didn't take the time to understand why it existed in the first place, but also because now you've created resistance when you didn't need to. So shadow IT isn't really a discipline problem. It's your smartest people routing around tools that were never designed for the way work actually happens. So you want to be sure to treat it that way. So just a couple comments. Thanks to you. They're already commenting here in the chat. We're streaming, like I said, to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, X, and TikTok as well. So those of you on TikTok, I've got you on a separate stream over here. Love to hear from you as well. I'll pull in some of your comments as well. So this first comment is from Roger on LinkedIn. Roger says, MRP planning is the one I see most. What to make and what to buy, almost always in Excel. And this is a really interesting one. And thanks for that feedback, Roger, because ERP systems were largely built to address MRP. And for those of you that aren't manufacturing, don't know what MRP is, it's essentially, Roger explained it really well. It's what do I make and what do I buy? So it's really, it's scheduling and timing the acquisition of raw materials that you can then schedule for production on the shop floor. And that's a very complex process, to figure out what raw materials do I need, when do I need them, where do I need them, and how does that coincide with the production schedule that I need to schedule on the shop floor to actually make the end goods or products that we're making. So that ERP systems were built, strangely enough, for MRP like 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So it's interesting that here we are 50 years later since the advent of MRP and ERP systems, and we're still talking about spreadsheets. And I think that's a good indicator of the challenges of the enterprise technology space. Is, first of all, technology is never going to fit all of your needs. Anytime you buy something off the shelf, you're going to end up with gaps or deficiencies in that solution, no matter what it is. You might get 90% of the way there of what you need, but that last 10%, that 10% of what the system can't do to fit your business, that's where shadow IT exists. And that's where people will step in. They're creative. They're oftentimes they have these genius solutions that, again, we cast stones at it because we don't want shadow IT, right? But we don't, sometimes we don't stop to appreciate that how creative some people are to create these shadow IT solutions. So thanks for that feedback there, Roger. Josh on LinkedIn says spreadsheets are the real ERP. I find it's used quite a lot across the organization. Users download from the ERP and work on the spreadsheet from reporting to data uploads between systems. Really good point. I mean, I think that's one of the challenges here today in today's day and age with cloud IT or cloud ERP systems, is that cloud is becoming, certainly more, it's enforcing or driving more standardization across companies, more consistency. It allows you to deploy a system without as much customization as you might have had in the past. But now the fact that you don't have as much customization as you might have had in the past, now that leads organizations to use or create their own shadow IT solutions more than they ever have in the past. And again, I think the 2030s, as we look to the late 2020s into the 2030s, I think we're just going to see a massive increase in the amount of shadow IT because of cloud ERP systems. It all sounds great in theory. Now it's all unicorns and rainbows about, deploying these cool new cloud solutions. But over time, there's a drift in your operations and how the cloud systems work. That drift creates a gap between your operational needs and what the software can or can't do. That gap between what technology can do and what your operations need, that's the gap that drives shadow IT. That gap will always exist, by the way. It's never going to go away. In fact, the gap is just going to more quickly get filled, I would argue, with new solutions because we can deploy them quickly now. I'm not a technical person, and the fact that I can create an app is terrifying. It should be terrifying to everyone listening right here. That like you do not want me creating an app myself personally for your business, but yet I can. If I worked for you, I could absolutely come in and create an app for you. Now I've got people on my team that are much better that I would say, yeah, they should be, but you don't want me doing it. So that's what you have to look at. How many people in your organization would you look at and say, do I trust that person to create an app that could be used by the broader organization? And again, it's just because you can build a solution doesn't mean you can't. So spreadsheets are the real ERP. I think AI is going to make it even more so because now I can also just create really elaborate spreadsheets with AI. I can go into Claude or whatever and create my own spreadsheet solution. So there's a myth buried in all this. And the myth is that cloud ERP will finally eliminate that pesky shadow IT. Well, it's actually going to do the opposite. And here's the mechanism. I want to explain how and why that is. Cloud systems are less flexible than the on-prem systems they replace. And that's not an accident. That's the business model because it's the most profitable, most scalable version for a cloud vendor. The cloud vendor wants thousands of customers using the same system the same way. That's the utopia for cloud vendors because they can scale it. They're more profitable that way. It's less to maintain. It's just a winning strategy for a vendor. Multi-tenant scale requires conformity. So the less you deviate, the better the system works for them and the better the business model is for the cloud vendors. But that's great. But now when you run the clock forward, you implement a cloud ERP today. And even if it meets, say, 90% of your needs, which is pretty good, 90% of your needs, it meets today. But the question was never, does it fit today? It's what's going to happen in 3 or 5 or 10 years from now. Your business changes, you acquire companies, you add product lines, customers demand new things, new leadership arrives with new operating models, new strategies. And meanwhile, the software is changing, but on their own roadmap. The vendors have got their own roadmap of what they think the future of their software should be. And it's following their direction on the vendor schedule. Now, we all hope and assume that the vendors are just going to magically know what we all want and need, and their software is going to be able to keep up, but that's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. Every business is so different, is changing in different ways. It's just impossible that any one vendor is going to do that. You're both moving, but you're not moving together. And that divergence between the two, that's the drift. And that's the drift where shadow IT lives. And that's why I think the drift is getting bigger, is because now you've created more of an opportunity for drift because now you've got less flexibility with this cloud ERP model. And at the same time, which we'll come back to this point a little bit later, now you've got AI, which is adding more flexibility and it's adding fuel to the fire of possibilities for shadow IT. So in the old world, when the gap opened up, you would customize the system. In the cloud world, you can't, or at least it's much harder to customize the system. So what do? Where does that pressure go? It doesn't go away. It goes into spreadsheets. It goes into unsanctioned apps. It goes into AI subscriptions that nobody approved. So the gap doesn't disappear. It just gets filled somewhere you can't see. And that's the whole reason it's called shadow IT, is because you don't see it. We go into organizations a lot and they have no idea, and they want us to help figure out how many spreadsheets, how many shadow systems are there. And they're almost terrified to know. Some leaders are actually, they don't want to know. I mean, it is that overwhelming, I think, in many cases, that some leaders just do not want to know what's really lurking under the surface. And that's why it's called shadow IT, because it's happening in the darkness. People don't know about a lot of it. And so you're not eliminating shadow IT, you're just relocating, and I would argue you're expanding it. So if you want to plan for that reality, instead of pretending the next platform is going to solve it 100% for you. We're talking about a really interesting topic that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is shadow IT. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase 0 without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 285. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm your host today. I'm also the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. We have offices in the U.S., Europe, Asia Pacific, and Africa. So wherever in the world you are, we can help. So be sure to reach out if you've got questions about your digital transformation. And we're talking here today about shadow IT. Fazil on LinkedIn says, is there really a future for monolithic huge ERP softwares? It's a great question. It's a huge debate in the industry. I think there probably is a need for it. I think it's more a matter of, the question I ask is not so much, is there a future for huge monolithic ERP systems, but what is the role of huge monolithic ERP systems in the future? Is it going to be more of a system of record? I think what happens, here's what I think happens, even though I'm critical, sometimes maybe overcritical of the monolithic ERP model. You have to look at it objectively and say, well, let's look at what's happening in the industry right now. We're creating a bunch of shadow IT unintentionally because we can. We can faster than ever deploy new AI apps. We can deploy AI itself. We can deploy and create really complex, robust spreadsheets, all using AI. So you've got this massive amount of flexibility in technology now, and that's going to create a massive amount of sprawl, technical sprawl across an organization. And the best counter to technical sprawl is ERP. ERP systems are the opposite of that. They're meant to drive and enforce standardization, standard workflows, single source of data, single source of truth. So I think that tension is always going to be there. ERP will never be enough for organizations, but you need them because you need that sort of structure. And some people would take it one step further and disagree with me, I think, on that, and say, no, you don't actually need the structure. You don't need a structured system of record like you did in the past. That's more for the humans to understand what's there. But AI, it doesn't matter how the data is structured. You can just throw it into a data lake or just, process a mass number of messy transactions, and AI will be able to figure it out. Maybe someday. We're certainly not there yet. So the question is going to become, is that true? And if it is, that could drive the future of ERP too. Jimmy on TikTok says spot on. So thank you for that comment. Cherry Berry joining from Malaysia. Thank you for being here. I'm actually going to be in Malaysia in a few days. So thanks for joining. Mincio joined on TikTok. DJI Booty is on as well. Thanks for joining. Thanks to everyone on all the platforms here. So that's my view on the future of monolithic ERP. I'd love to hear from the audience here. What do you think? Is ERP dying? Does ERP have a role in this AI world? Love to hear from you here. Here's a comment on YouTube. Don't blame the users. Solve their problem. They would love it. And that's the way you've got to look at it. And again, you see this a lot in this industry because let's look at the economics and the incentives of the way this industry is built. The industry is built. When I say this industry, I mean the technology and the consulting industry. Most of the industry is built to sell software, right? So I'm going to come in, if I'm selling you software, which I'm not, we're independent, we're agnostic, and that's our whole business model at Third Stage. But most, 95, 97, 99% of the ERP consultants in the world are somehow affiliated with the software vendor. So they're getting commissions on selling more software They're getting leads from the software vendors. They're getting marketing support from the software vendors. So they're sort of beholden to the software vendors. So you can understand why most ERP consultants drink the Kool-Aid and have pretty extreme biases. And one of the biases that exists is the users are the problem. Like that's just something we hear way too much. And I think it's a very arrogant, dangerous way to look at this situation, especially if you're an outside consultant. There's no way to, threaten a organization and create chaos in an organization faster than telling people that they are a problem. Because essentially, when you say shadow IT is a problem, you're essentially saying the people are the problem, because the people created these shadow IT systems. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. They created it because they thought they needed it. So again, back to the point, we can either sit here and cast stones and blame the people for the fact that you created these shadow IT systems and we need to just take it away from you. Or we can say there's a reason that exists. Let's understand that and then figure out a way to deploy technology that maybe replicates what they do and treat it as a internal asset. I mean, a lot of times what's crazy about this negative view of shadow IT is a lot of times that shadow IT is your intellectual property. It's your secret sauce. It's the way you compete. It's the way you beat your competition. It's the way you function as a business. And yet we as technologists will sit here on the outside looking at the business saying, well, the people are the problem. They create all the shadow IT and all these spreadsheets. They should be doing that all in an ERP system. Well, yeah, it sounds good in theory. And I'm sure they would if they could and if it made sense. But for some reason, it doesn't make sense. We've got to figure out why it doesn't make sense. So I agree with you here on Dostonian on YouTube that says, don't blame the users, solve their problems. They love it. So great comment there. So I want to reframe shadow IT one more way, particularly for executive teams. So if you're an executive team member, if you're a leader in an organization, or if you're working with leaders, be sure to share with them this little clip here that I'm about to highlight. And that is that your shadow IT is your intellectual property. Just stop for a second. It's your IP. You might think of shadow IT as this 100% bad thing. We got to get rid of it. All the vendors are telling you how bad it is. The consultants are telling you it's terrible. Get rid of it. Well, okay, maybe you do want to get rid of it, but that is your intellectual property. So it should be treated like a corporate asset. So as ugly and as dirty and as annoying as that spreadsheet is, or those spreadsheets are, it's a corporate asset, whether you like it or not. Now, you might want to upgrade the asset. You want to invest in that asset to make it better, but it is still your asset, so don't throw it out. I know it doesn't look like an asset. It's a spreadsheet on someone's laptop. A lot of you probably haven't seen it. A lot of you probably don't understand how the macros work. It's not on your balance sheet. It doesn't have a monetary value, but what's actually inside it is stuff that should be really important to use a business. It's usually business logic that took years to refine. It's usually decision rules that no one ever wrote down anywhere else. It's usually the specific way that you do something that your competitors can't replicate. That's key, because your ERP system by definition is not going to be able to handle your competitive advantages. If it could, then that's not a competitive advantage. So the more competitive advantage you have and the more of a leg up you have in the industry, the harder it's going to be for you to replicate your competitive advantage in any modern technology. The other thing that shadow IT represents is institutional knowledge that exists exactly in exactly one place. So this is all your secret sauce. It's how you compete. In a lot of organizations, that's genuinely load bearing, and the business does not run without it. And so this is the part that should get your attention. And that is that shadow IT is often the last place you still have complete control of your own data. And that should be concerning. I mean, your data may be inaccurate, but at least you have control over it. The minute you move it to a software vendor, especially a cloud vendor, especially once you start training AI tools on behalf of vendors versus for your own edification, that's where you start to give up control of that data. So for better or for worse, the data in your spreadsheets is your data. You have complete control over it. No one can tell you how you can or can't use it. But the minute you move it to a cloud solution, now all of a sudden you have limitations on how you can or can't use it. So it may be error prone, it may be hard to scale, definitely has cybersecurity exposure. And that was a good point that an audience member just brought up about that. Those are all fair points, but no vendor is going to tell you what you're allowed to do with it. No API policy is restricting which tools can touch it. So you own it outright, which is, I guess, the good news. So when someone proposes ripping it all out, keep in mind they have an incentive to do that because they want you to move everything to their cloud solution because they're going to make more money if you do. So of course they're going to call your baby ugly. They're going to tell you that the spreadsheets are the problem and that you need to get all that data out of the system. So the right response isn't great, let's clean house. It's what business logic are we about to lose and where's it going to live instead? What are we going to do with it? We can't just assume that a new ERP system is going to handle it because it probably can't. So you want to make sure you're migrating the IP, not just deleting the container that you used to live in. This is from Moyed on LinkedIn. Says, yes, I have a second brain and supply chain agents that help me do my work. Is that shadow IT? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, if it's helping you do your job and it's helping you do your job faster, is that shadow IT? Is that a bad thing? Should corporate IT drive that for you? Or should you be entitled as an end user, as a person just trying to get your job done, should you be entitled to or allowed to do whatever you want with technology? That's a big question when it comes to shadow IT. That's the tricky part too. Because if I tell you, Moyad, I don't want you to have a second brain in supply chain agents unless it's the one that I tell you you can use. Maybe you know something I don't. Maybe you have a better solution in your spreadsheets or with your supply chain agents. Those are the kinds of questions we've got to ask. Lena joining from Poland. Thank you for being here today. Another country I'll be in a couple months. So thanks for being here today, Lena. Here's another comment from Dostonian on YouTube. Says, if you make the data consistent and reliable, then Excel work will move to the last mile. But this takes an investment from leadership, users, and IT, typically only done when there are errors. That's a good question, or a good point, I should say. Usually it's a reactive thing when we try to eliminate shadow IT. Shadow IT is not a problem until it is. It's like if everything's working and everyone's getting the data they need, executives are getting the reports and the visibility they need, a lot of times we don't ask a lot of questions. However, whatever you need to do, Dostonian, whatever you need to do to get the job done, just do it. But the minute you can't, and I see that there's an error in a spreadsheet and it causes us some chaos or some harm as a company, then we start questioning the shadow IT and throwing up the red flag and saying, well, we need to get rid of shadow IT, because if we had an ERP system or a standard system off the shelf, it probably wouldn't have created that error. It wouldn't have, exposed us to that risk, to that operational risk or whatever. So that's the other thing too. You don't want to wait until shadow IT becomes a problem. Again, you want to recognize, first of all, understand what it is. I mean, so many clients we go into don't even fully understand the extent of the shadow IT in their organizations. And then once they do, they just want to get rid of it all, oftentimes, instead of, slowing down and say, well, hold on, before you just throw it out, let's understand why it's there in the first place. So great points there. Fossil says, when are you visiting Dubai? I don't think it'll be this year. I was there last year. I don't think I'll make it this year, but I do love Dubai. In fact, I was talking to my two sons about Dubai last night. We're talking about how cool it is there and how much it's changed in recent years. Moyad on LinkedIn says you can't automate chaos. That is absolutely true. And oftentimes, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, operations are chaotic. I mean, you're not going to get around that. But maybe it's not even just chaos. It's also just, we talk about being future proof and nimble and agile and all these buzzwords that we like to use in this industry. Really, what that points to is the need to move fast and to pivot and change. If my systems are set up one way 5 years ago, things change in 5 years. Customers demand new things. The market demands new things. We merge with other companies. We acquire new product lines. Things just change, and our technology doesn't change the way we need it to. It just won't. It's impossible. It's not going to change the way each of us need or want technology to change. So again, it creates a gap. So over time, we change. We go acquire companies. We grow. Our business model changes. New executives come in with new operational leadership, whatever. It creates this gap, and that gap is where the shadow IT fills the gap. And the alternative, by the way, one thing to think about is the alternative. If we say, well, we just don't like this concept of shadow IT. Well, imagine if it didn't exist. Like, your business probably wouldn't run without shadow IT. I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever said that out loud in this industry, but most businesses can't function without shadow IT. So think about that. I mean, your shadow IT is arguably just as, maybe even more important than your core ERP system, because it is the last mile. I mean, whether that last mile is a long mile or a short mile is a different story. But to the point earlier, whoever just said the comment about the last mile, that last mile is becoming a longer mile over time, the longer you use a system typically. And again, with cloud systems being less flexible than on-premise systems were 10, 20, 30 years ago, that's creating more of a demand or more of a tension between operations and technology and the way it works. So totally agree that you can't automate chaos. Thank you for all the great comments here. This is super helpful. Makes my job a lot easier when the audience comments, because then I don't have to stall and think of random things to talk about. And it's what you want to talk about anyway. Here's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have a good answer. I'm going to think of one though, and maybe the audience can help me answer this. This is from Celestium Estrada on YouTube. It says, how do you maintain your sleep when you're in the drinking from the fire hose situation? So how do we stop the madness? How do we ensure that we can be effective as an organization when you're drinking from the fire hose. And I think that's a good point. I mean, you think about, people, the pressure that individuals are under in organizations. They're under a lot of pressure to provide whatever data executives want, or to complete transactions, regardless of whether or not a system can handle the need to do a certain transaction, or do whatever it is to run your business. And in some ways, we should be thankful that thank God we don't have employees that just sit there and say, well, sorry, my ERP system can't do whatever it does. So I'm just not going to do anything, or I'm going to give you faulty information or incomplete information, or I'm not going to complete a workflow because it can't be handled by my ERP system. I mean, that would be ridiculous, right? To expect or think that an employee might do that. So again, we should be thankful that employees are doing something about it, and they're figuring out a way to fill that gap, to fill that void between the technology as it works today and the operational needs that the company may have. So I think when you're drinking from the fire hose and you're just trying to survive, I guess you could say, or get the information you need or get the job done, if you need to create a spreadsheet and that's a fast way to do it, that's what you're going to do. And then over time, you realize, wow, the spreadsheet actually works pretty good, and I'm getting used to it. I'm comfortable with it. I've used Excel for decades now, so it's easy for me to create a new spreadsheet or to modify it. So it's totally understandable, or should be understandable, why in a drinking from the fire hose situation, or in any sort of chaotic or changing situation, we have shadow IT to help bail us out. I mean, it's how we all survive. I mean, I bet most of us are using shadow IT solutions without realizing that we're part of the problem, if you will. Even though, again, I'm here to argue partially that it's not a problem per se. It's not as black and white as that. Here's that comment from Roger on LinkedIn. Roger says, almost every ERP demo starts with the phrase where you start your day and where you end your day, but it never usually works out that way. It's a good point. I mean, it's the way they demo a product may sound good in theory. It probably looks good to a lot of executives, but when it comes to the frontline people that are actually being tasked to use that system, that's where the rub is. That's where the friction is, the tension between what the needs are and what the system can do. Third Stage Consulting on YouTube says, exactly, it's almost always about people reacting to a problem instead of thinking ahead. And to be fair, we want our employees reacting to a problem. Now, ideally, we wish the problem didn't exist in the first place, but most organizations have a certain amount of reactive nature to them, and the people accordingly have a certain amount of reactive nature. So they are being reactive in many ways when they're creating these sorts of solutions. Here's an interesting question from PCG. Business predictability says, if businesses use technology like microservices to focus on the workarounds and the customizations, couldn't it be used to bring the secret sauce forward from large on-prem systems to cloud ERP? Yes, it could. And that is a great point. If there are solutions and alternatives to the limitations of both monolithic ERP systems and shadow IT. It's not either or. I mean, you can have solutions that solve it in other ways, and this is a great example of that. Whereas if you build microservices, which are essentially applications or applications that process information or workflows that might be happening outside the core system, but it's integrating back to the core system without changing the core system, if that makes sense, that gives you a certain amount of flexibility around the edges, to where your core ERP system can be a little bit more monolithic, more standard, more rigid, more structured, things that ERP are good at generally. ERP systems are generally good at that structure and the rigidity. And rigidity, again, isn't necessarily a bad thing until it becomes a problem. So let's just call, for, even though this is a broad generalization, we call ERP the rigid core monolithic system. And that alone is not going to get the job done. You need something. And that's the gap between core ERP system and what we actually need. There's still a gap there. So what do we do? Are we going to use spreadsheets? If we don't want spreadsheets, then one way to do that is to create these microservices or other applications that can be custom and flexible, maybe modified specifically to you as a business, but it's not breaking the core ERP system. So that's one option. It's another way to look at it as like best of breed. If you're looking at, it's a similar concept, but different. Best of breed would be, I've got my core ERP system for a lot of what I do, but I'm going to build or buy these other apps on the edges that do the other things that the core ERP system can't. So, for example, a lot of companies will buy a standalone CRM system like a Salesforce, or a standalone human capital management and HR system like Workday, and then they'll tie it back to their core ERP. That's very common, but that's a way to manage the shadow IT situation and to ensure that you've got your secret sauce moving from your on-prem to cloud ERP. Customization is another one. We're not talking a lot about it here today so far, but customization is another symptom of systems that aren't aligned with what your business needs are. So, when the system can't do what you want, you change the system. If you can't change the system, then you start building your other shadow IT apps like your spreadsheets, your AI agents, or whatever it is. So good points here. Dostonian says spot on. You need the people to solve the problem, or you're just wasting money. And we do, this is becoming more and more of a problem. I've always been a big believer in change management. If you followed me for any time, you've probably heard me talk a lot about change management. But I think change management is becoming more and more important than ever, because the humans are getting overlooked more as technology becomes cooler, and as it changes more and becomes more powerful. It's easy to relegate the humans to an obstacle. It's sort of like they become an obstacle, or the users that we've got to get on board to use this cool new technology, versus, well, maybe they should be the core of the focus rather than the technology itself. And that's a nuance that, of course, technologists that are trying to sell technology, it doesn't fit their narrative, so they're not going to promote that message. But you as a leader have to decide what's important to you. Delirium on TikTok, thanks for being here. Kabdullah on TikTok says, do you have ERP platform you sell? No, we do not. We do not sell any ERP software, but we work with all the major ones. SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, NetSuite, Infor, Epicor, Workday, Salesforce, all the major ERP systems we work with and help clients implement all those different systems. Delirium says on TikTok, is single source of truth a myth? I would say yes. If I had to choose yes or no, I'd say, yeah, it is a myth. There is no single source of the truth, because we all strive for it, and we probably should strive for it. But in reality, the technology is changing so fast, and you're typically not going to have one single system that can do everything. Now, you could integrate the systems to ensure that you do, in fact, end up with a single source of truth. You could put in a Snowflake or a Databricks or Power BI or something like that ties together and allows you to integrate data across platforms. So you could end up with a single source of truth, but it's a lot harder to get there than it sounds. And most companies don't ever really get there. Delirium says, love your content, man. Thank you, Delirium. I'm glad you enjoy it. Got quite the following over here on TikTok. I'm oftentimes so focused on LinkedIn and YouTube that I forget that I've got followers over here too. So thanks for joining. Soy Antonio, thanks for joining on TikTok. Appreciate you all being here. Love to hear your thoughts on shadow IT. That's what we're talking about right now. Shadow IT, and how shadow IT is becoming more of a problem as time goes on. And I'm actually taking that one step further and saying it's actually not as much of a problem as we think, or it's not as negative as a thing as we may think. So I'm going to come back to a point I was starting to mention, which is that cloud standardization is something that's driving more shadow IT. And this is something I believe strongly in. And I think it's sort of like getting into the psychology of why businesses do what they do. And that's something I've been super fascinated by, just in the last 3 or 5 years. I've really been trying to dive deep into my understanding of why companies and teams and leaders make the decisions they do. Because again, it's easy to look at it and judge it and cast stones at it and say, well, this leader didn't do that, or this person shouldn't have created that spreadsheet. They should have been doing that in the ERP system. But most people are trying to do a good job. I'd say 95% of employees that we deal with at our clients, yeah, they're not perfect, but most of them are trying to do a good job. They just want to get the job done. They care. And so it's actually the fact that they want to do a good job and they care, and they've got some creativity and some heroics that they rely on, and tribal knowledge, all that stuff. That all feeds into shadow IT. So someone that knows where the bodies are buried, they know how a system or how operations really works. They know what the needs are of the business. Those are the people that typically create the shadow IT. So it's like the smartest, most knowledgeable people that really understand the front lines better than anyone. They're the ones typically creating the shadow IT. And then you've got people, back in the boardroom at the executive level with their consultants saying, hey, we need to get rid of the shadow IT. It's a huge problem. And, and again, I've yet to hear anyone, especially in the consulting world, again, for reasons I mentioned before, because consultants are paid to peddle and promote technology. I've yet to hear a consultant say, wait, hold on a second. Let's dive into that spreadsheet a little bit more and understand why it exists. Usually it's like, yep, that spreadsheet sucks. We need to get rid of it. Our system does it better. Let's move it over to our system. And that myopic thinking is really dangerous because it's usually not that simple. And again, not only is it not that simple from an operational perspective, from an organizational perspective, it's one of the more reckless ways to address the people side of things is just to tell them that their solution sucks and it needs to be replaced by a new system, rather than, hey, you've been using the spreadsheet for 15 years. That is crazy and cool. At the same time that you've been able to run the business on the spreadsheet, let's figure out and understand and work together to figure out how could we take this spreadsheet and make it a little bit more standard and more part of our core central solution that others could benefit from too. And that's a different message than telling someone we need to get rid of it because it sucks and that we don't like that they created the solution that we now need to replace. That's all important stuff in my opinion, but I'd love to hear from you how you think this is all fitting into the world of shadow IT. We're talking about a really interesting topic that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is shadow IT. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the nights forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons that could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 285. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm your host today. I'm also the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. We have offices in the US, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Africa. So wherever in the world you are, we can help. So be sure to reach out if you've got questions about your digital transformation. And we're talking here today about shadow IT. Josh on LinkedIn says there's a place for shadow IT, let users solve their own problems within the boundaries of governance. That's the key thing there is, anything we use, whether it's an ERP system, AI, spreadsheets, whatever, we need to make sure that there are boundaries of governance. And when there's deviations or required or suggested deviations from that governance, that's where, we need to have a better and healthier way of collaborating and communicating internally to figure out, let's not just squash these problems that we're trying to solve that might require us to move outside of the governance. rather than just squashing it. Why not understand, well, why is that? And maybe there's a way that the core current ERP systems or the core technology environment could handle whatever it is we're trying to accomplish with shadow IT. But we need to work together to figure it out. And when I say we, I'm talking about like the business, IT, leadership. Let's not pretend it doesn't exist, because it is going to exist. It's going to happen. Now we've got to have a process in place for how we address situations where current technology can't handle what the needs are. There needs to be some sort of governance around that, because oftentimes that will bring to the surface the need for more technology. And at least then, if we do buy more technology, at least we're doing it more deliberately and as a broader organization rather than just individuals out doing their own thing. So I think that's a great point. You need the governance, but you need ways to address and escalate things that don't fit within the current IT, sort of the sanctioned IAT roadmap. Joshua goes on to say, judge it on value delivered. It surfaces shortcomings of what IT's shipped and buys IT breathing space while they work the backlog. And then here's a closing point that doesn't show up on the screen here. Closing comment from Joshua says, kill shadow IT outright and you're killing innovation and killing productivity. I totally agree with that. You can't, first of all, you're not going to be able to kill it completely, but even if you could, you're going to kill innovation. You're going to kill some of your competitive advantage, some of your key workarounds. I mean, I know workaround has a negative connotation, but sometimes we need to work around the system. It's not always a terrible thing. So cloud standardization, that's driving more shadow IT. And again, because we can't just change the software to fit our business the way we used to, now we've got to conform more to these cloud systems. And not only that, but cloud systems are becoming more and more homogeneous. I mean, the model for software vendors that's most profitable for them, allows them to scale the most, is the one where the systems look the same and people are using the systems the same, because that gives them that multi-tenant scale that cloud vendors need and want. And the less deviation there is from that standard core, the easier it is for them to maintain a common core that can be used by thousands or tens of thousands of organizations throughout the world. So cloud systems are making it worse. And I think it's going to continue to get worse, but I'd love to hear from you. For those of you that are using a cloud ERP system and have been for some time, I'd love to know from you, has the fit gotten better or worse as your business has changed? Because if I'm implementing a cloud ERP system today, it's not easy, but it's reasonable to think I could find a cloud system and deploy it in a way that meets most of my needs today. But the question isn't today, it's what happens in 3 or 5 years as my business changes. Our business at Third Stage has changed tremendously. It continues to change. It will change dramatically in the next coming years. And so there's no way to predict how that's going to affect core ERP systems. And so if you've been on a core cloud ERP system for 3 or 5 or 10 years, that's where the gaps grow, that drift between the way your operations work and the way the technology is built. And the technology is going to continue to change and evolve. Your business is going to change and evolve, but they're not going in the same direction. Typically you're drifting in different directions, not intentionally. It's not good or bad. It's just the way it works. And so that's the gap that we've got to figure out. But I'd love to hear from the audience here. If you're using shadow, or if you're using cloud ERP systems and you have been for any amount of time, you've been live on a cloud ERP system for some time, I'd love to hear from you, just your feedback on it. Has it kept up, or has your business stayed in sync with the software and vice versa as your business has changed and grown? I'd love to hear your feedback. So if you're using NetSuite or Workday or any of those, Salesforce or any cloud solution, I'd love to hear from you. Now here's another thing I want to bring up, and this is more of a social experiment I did, and it wasn't until I did the social experiment that I realized how pervasive shadow IT is and how understandable it is. And that is, I created on if you follow me on Instagram, TikTok, or even YouTube Shorts, you may have seen a video series that I do. It's the spreadsheet guy. It's the guy that he's a guy that I meant to create him as the guy that exists in every organization. He's that guy that's got all the tribal knowledge in his head. He's built a bunch of really cool, robust spreadsheets that get the job done. And there's a certain amount of dependency that the organization has on this one guy or gal. And the reason I did the social experiment is because I was trying to put a face or add some humanity to this concept of shadow IT and spreadsheets, because I just found it interesting that after being in this industry for 30 years, it's been 30 years of completely constantly bashing spreadsheets. Sort of like, spreadsheets are the problem, they're the enemy. We've got to eliminate them in the name of ERP. But yet 30 years later, the spreadsheets are going strong. They're going stronger than ever. And like I'm saying here today, or arguing with you here today, or um, presenting to you here today, my argument that shadow IT and spreadsheets in particular are going to continue to increase in popularity, not decrease. But anyway, I created this character to create kind of the humanity of it. Like, why does this person exist, and why is this person creating spreadsheets? And I try to do it in a fun, lighthearted way. But what was interesting about the social experiment is how much people like this character, because I tried to make him like not unlikable, but I wanted him to be someone that you could laugh at or with, but also someone that you could relate to. You could kind of, and I also wanted him to be somewhat of the problem. I wanted to present him as somewhat of the obstacle, the resistor of change, and that sort of thing. But I also wanted to explain why he's resisting the change. It's not because he wants to be a pain in the ass. And so there's a whole story behind it that I try to tell and demonstrate with the shadow IT concept. That's really what I was trying to demonstrate with this one character called Spreadsheet Guy, was to create a sort of a world where we could understand why it exists, and hopefully understand the concept of shadow IT a little bit better. So I could have just as easily called him the shadow IT guy, but I chose to call him the Spreadsheet Guy. But anyway, if you've seen that series or any of those little shorts I've done with Spreadsheet Guy, I'd love to hear if you can relate to that, or if that is something that connects with you at your organization. And sometimes, it's really interesting too, watching on social media when I post this, is how many people, including people like that are consultants like me, and people that you would think are like the futurist, effective technology adopters, some of the fastest technology adopters in the world. Sometimes there's all these people that are commenting on these posts saying, hey, I am shadow, or I am Spreadsheet Guy, which I found really interesting. It's like people can relate so much that they're almost like, hey, that's me. I'm the Spreadsheet Guy. And so, and they say it with a sense of pride too, which I think is pretty interesting, because again, the technologists and the consultants and oftentimes the executives and leaders within organizations come in and say, hey, spreadsheets are bad. Spreadsheet Guy is a problem. He's going to be the big resistor of change. So we've got to neutralize him and mitigate the risk of him. But again, the reason I created that character is to say, hey, he's a person. He's a human. He knows a lot. He's funny. He's likable. Apparently people seem to like him. And he's not, I've yet to see someone say, yeah, he's the people like him are the problem, which I thought more people would say. So anyway, I love to hear from you. Do you have a Spreadsheet Guy within your organization, or is there someone you can think of? You don't have to mention them by name. And maybe it's you, maybe it is you. And if you want to admit that you're a Spreadsheet Guy, I don't think that's a bad thing. But I just am curious more than anything, if you have a Spreadsheet Guy or gal in your organization, or maybe there's multiple ones of them. Love to hear your feedback on that. Here on TikTok, yes, I'm aware. Which guy is Spreadsheet Guy? Well, just search my TikTok channel. If you scroll through, or just search Spreadsheet Guy on TikTok, you'll find that. And that was from 225, 226 on TikTok. Was it Ways Woe on TikTok says the SAP S/4HANA private cloud has been a good compromise for my company. So that's great. Great feedback. And I'd love to hear, is it, and well, here's another thing though. You're talking about private cloud, which is an important differentiator, because there's private cloud in SAP, and then there's public cloud. Private cloud is more like an on-premise. Essentially, it's like the on-premise S/4HANA, but someone else, a hyperscaler, is hosting it for you, but you still have a certain amount of flexibility to customize however you want. So it's kind of a hybrid. Whereas I'd be even more curious to hear anyone who's using SAP S/4HANA public cloud, because that's the one that's more rigid. That's where you get the jewel and all the innovation and the R&D that SAP is spending money on. They're putting most of that, or more of that, into the public cloud version than they are at private cloud. So ideally, they would have everyone on public cloud, because if they could get all the SAP customers on SAP S/4HANA public cloud, it's one system to maintain. They don't have to worry about customizations breaking. They can do all the extensions in the BTP layer, and some of the outside the microservices layers, as PCG mentioned a minute ago. So good feedback. I'd love to hear too, if anyone here is using SAP public cloud, if you have that same feedback. Okay. 225, 226 is asking if I've ever heard about EBPF XDP. I've not heard of that. I think it's an ERP system from what you're saying here, but I have not heard of it. Rufus on TikTok says modern cloud SAP is worse than ECC. We hear that a lot from customers that they like the on-prem ECC better than S4HANA. At the very least, I'd say, it's safe to say as a generalization that most clients we work with are fairly happy with ECC and they don't see a compelling material improvement with S4HANA other than the fact that it's newer and SAP is forcing customers to move to S4HANA. But as far as just pure functionality, ROI, what works for my business, where am I going to get the business value? I think a majority of SAP customers would just stay on ECC if they could. And that's the problem that I think SAP is having right now, is because so many customers are happy with ECC. So they're almost a victim of their own success. They've created such a good product that's become so entrenched in the Fortune 500 and these big multinationals that now convincing them to move to S4HANA is very difficult. And that's why they're having to resort to tactics like decommissioning systems and cutting it off. I think they just increased the deadline. I thought I just saw yesterday that they decreased or changed the deadline to get off of ECC before support cuts off. I think they changed it from 2030 to 2033, if I read that correctly, but I have not had a chance to validate that. If anyone knows, I'd love to hear from you if you're in the SAP community. 225, 226 says really cool live. Thank you. I'm glad you are enjoying it. And thanks for all the great comments here on TikTok. I appreciate that. Okay. Rufus says public cloud sucks and unadapted. So that's one person's comment on SAP public cloud. And I think, it's interesting too. I'll play devil's advocate on that too. When we say a system sucks, we have to, I think the reason it sucks, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if you disagree with this comment, but a lot of times when people say a system sucks, it's usually not that the system sucks. It's that it doesn't do what we need it to do. And when we get into public cloud or SaaS cloud solutions, we're creating situations that are more standard and more predictable, which is good. Most companies want that, but now you've given that, you've gained that, but you've lost flexibility. And so many of these cloud systems are not flexible. They're not as flexible as they're on-prem. Now, some systems, like I would say like NetSuite, and I'm not here to advocate for or against any system here, and I'm sure I'll trigger some of you with this comment, but if you look at like a NetSuite or a Salesforce or even a Workday, let's pick those three: Salesforce, Workday, and NetSuite. Those are all native cloud solutions. Like they were built in the cloud decades ago. They've evolved. All the R&D over time has gone into that same platform. The platform itself hasn't really changed, whereas like SAP has had to rewrite and recreate an entire new platform for the cloud, which is a massive undertaking. It's impressive they've been able to do it. But when you look at NetSuite, Workday, Salesforce, some of those native cloud solutions, I'd say they probably, I don't want to say they suck less, but they have created more, they've had more time and more investment in creating tools that give them a certain amount of flexibility that, that allow, especially a smaller mid-market company, it gives them the flexibility they need in many cases. Whereas like these traditional ERP vendors that are moving to the cloud for the first time, that's where the perception that their cloud solutions suck, that's where it's coming from, is, in my opinion, is because the customers are used to the system that they had in the past that was highly flexible, that they could customize no matter how they needed to, for better or for worse. And so that is the real challenge here. This is from Ravit on LinkedIn, says Shadow IT gets treated like a discipline problem. It isn't. It's your smartest people routing around tools that were never designed for the way work actually happened. Every workaround is free product feedback about where your systems fail. That's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. It's a healthy way to look at it too. And again, I don't know why it doesn't fully make sense to me, even though it's been going on for decades. It doesn't fully make sense to me why there's such a negative perception of shadow IT. And again, I understand that in a perfect world, we'd get rid of it all or we wouldn't have it, but we're in an imperfect world and you've got people that are willing to create solutions despite your limited system. So maybe we start looking at that as a positive thing. And to Ravit's point here, maybe we look at that as feedback about where the systems are failing and understand maybe it is a training issue. Maybe the person that created the spreadsheet just doesn't understand how to do things in the system, or maybe there's a better way or a more standard way we'd want them to do things. But chances are really, really high that person created that spreadsheet or that workaround because they couldn't get what they needed out of the system. I mean, it just is. And think about it. Like, why would you, like, who wants to create a spreadsheet? Like, who really wants to go create another tool and have another thing to maintain? I mean, it's not like there's nothing really to gain by doing it unless you had to. Now, some people would say, and I think this part is true, and this is the tricky part, is that over time, as I build out that spreadsheet and as my tribal knowledge gets codified into the system that I've created, I do create for myself a sense of value and purpose. Now, all of a sudden, the company is more dependent on me, and I'm more valuable to the organization because I'm the one that knows how the spreadsheet works. I've created my own little world of how this workflow works. So I'm extremely valuable, which is good, right? Until you go to change that or until that person leaves the organization. And so that's why you have to be really tricky and deliberate about how you address these people. Because the minute you take it away from them and say, the spreadsheet sucks, it's shadow IT, we need to get rid of it. I mean, why would I, now all of a sudden you've alienated me from the solution? Like, I'm not going to be excited about this new ERP system or this new digital transformation because you're just telling me my spreadsheet sucks and all the work I've been doing for 10 or 20 years to build and fine tune the spreadsheet and operate within it day to day. You're telling me that sucks and you just want to get rid of it. So how's that going to make me feel? And how is that going to get me excited about a digital transformation? So I think that's the way, if you're a leader, whether you like it or not, I mean, that's the reality. That's how people respond to criticism of the shadow IT. And it gets back to the comment of, if you call someone's baby ugly, it's highly offensive, right? You don't call my baby ugly. I created this thing and I take pride in it. And by the way, I've held it together. It might be glue and duct tape and a bunch of patchwork solutions I've built, but it has held the operations together. May not be pretty, may not have always worked 100% of the time, but it's probably a lot better than it would have been if you hadn't, if you didn't have the shadow IT in the first place. So great point you bring up, Ravid. Here's a question from Third Stage. What podcasts other than Transformation Ground Control do you listen to? Love to. This is actually a really good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked this on the podcast, but what other podcasts are you all listening to? Just so we understand our audience and what your interests are. Are there other podcasts where they talk about ERP, digital transformation, shadow IT, that sort of thing? Love to hear your feedback. So great question there from Third Stage. Hello, Arun from Philly. Thanks for being here today. That's so weird. I'm going to be in Philly in a little over a week or 2 weeks, I guess. So all these people joining from places that I have in my near future. So thank you all for being here. Okay. Here's another comment. Sorry, I'm just trying to digest all these comments in the chat. This is from Joshua again on LinkedIn. Cloud ERP is only accelerating this. We saw this firsthand. We've moved off an ERP that had been customized over years, processes molded to exactly how the business worked onto a new cloud ERP. That gap between the old Taylor way of working and the new out-of-the-box process is what drove shadow IT through the roof. So we asked 3 questions. Is this a tech issue, a process issue, or a training issue? The results are interesting. Now I want to know, what was it? Was it a training, tech, or process issue? Or some combination of all the above, I would assume. So I'd love to hear more about that. And I'd love to hear if anyone can relate to that. Anyone who's moved from a customized on-prem to cloud, I'd love to hear, are you seeing the shadow IT phenomena that we're talking about here today? Another comment here. This is a really good one. This has not come up yet, but it's an important talking point. And this is from someone on LinkedIn. I apologize, I don't see your full name. But it says the main concern of a shadow IT is security and being able to allow other people to continue working up from your work. In other words, it is not always easy to understand another's spreadsheet. So in other words, security is an issue. Now you've got data residing in someone's spreadsheet. Oftentimes it's in their local laptop or their local machine. Sometimes it's saved in a semi-secure shared document collaboration system like ShareFile or SharePoint or whatever. Sometimes you're passing information back and forth in Teams or emails. And so you're just exposing, you're exposing and introducing more cybersecurity risk into the organization. Now, of course, we can't not do that simply because we don't want to have a cybersecurity risk, because we are creating the risk of cybersecurity issues or data privacy issues, which is a thing. It's a problem, but it's probably less of a threat in the short term, for sure, less of a threat than just not being able to do your job, or not, if you didn't have the workarounds to begin with. And so it's a good point. If you do have shadow IT, you probably have more cybersecurity issues, which means you just need to mitigate that risk. Now, again, in a perfect world, you find a way to limit the number of spreadsheets because you have such great technologies out there that you roll out to the users that they don't need the spreadsheets. But the problem is most corporate IT departments do not do that. They end up failing miserably in their ERP implementations, and then the ERP system isn't what it was supposed to be. It wasn't rolled out effectively. It can't do everything we need it to do. And so even with the most modern, newest ERP implementations, you're typically creating more shadow IT and unintentionally creating more cybersecurity risk as well. Hello, Dark Suburb on TikTok. Thanks for being here today. Teresa, thank you for being here as well. A lot of people watching on TikTok today, so thanks for all the great comments. This is from Rufus on TikTok. Says it simply comes with too many restrictions, not enough straightforward customization processes. I assume you're talking about public cloud there as it relates to that. So that's good feedback there. There's a couple other points I wanted to touch on too, in addition to more questions as they come up. I want to come back to AI and how AI is just supercharging the use of spreadsheets. It's amazing to me how, like, as much as the world of technology has changed, probably the most consistent thing in technology has been two things. One is the high failure rates of ERP systems. That just has not changed at all in the 30 years I've been doing this. What else hasn't changed is how prevalent Microsoft Excel is. I mean, think about all the tech trends that have come and gone, all the ERP vendors that have come and gone. The one thing that's still here is Microsoft Excel. And to me, that is super fascinating. And I think that should tell us all we need to know about why shadow IT exists. Is shadow IT a real thing? And is shadow IT going to go away? You don't hear about Microsoft as a company having problems because there's less Microsoft Excel adoption. People are less dependent on Microsoft Excel, so therefore they're not buying as many licenses or subscriptions to Office 365. I have not heard that news. Maybe I've missed it, but I don't think that's a thing. I don't think that's been a headline anytime ever. And I don't think it'll be a headline anytime ever either. Or if it is, it's because some other competitor, someone creates a better spreadsheet. That might be interesting, like an AI infused spreadsheet, which I guess Microsoft has sort of done with Copilot and Excel, which again, put spreadsheets and AI together. Now you've got a real problem. If you think shadow IT is a problem now you've got Copilot, which allows you to create even more robust spreadsheets. I've created some amazing spreadsheets myself in just using we have an internal AI tool we use, and I've used that to create spreadsheets based on all the analysis on all the stuff that we've done with clients over the years. So, I mean, just the power now to be able to create very robust, powerful spreadsheets, and I can maintain them and test them and make sure they're more accurate than in the past. So you put all this together, and it's hard to see a world where the spreadsheets are going to go away. Because now I can create them easier than ever. If they do go away, by the way, it's not because shadow IT has gone away. It's because it's just been replaced by some other shadow IT. So maybe I don't depend as much on spreadsheets as I used to, but in lieu of more spreadsheets, maybe I'm creating more custom apps in Claude or, in some other AI tool. So, that's what you should really be thinking about is if you've got 1,000 employees in your organization, you've got 1,000 people now with easy access to an easy ability to create spreadsheets, and not only spreadsheets, but now they can create apps, and they can create apps that integrate to your core enterprise technologies. That's scary because now you've got no control over what's integrating back to your core ERP systems. So Dostonian on YouTube says, how much have you seen Copilot or other AI being successful at replacing humans? I haven't seen it be at all successful yet in replacing humans. I think, in our industry in consulting, I thought it might reduce like the amount of time we spend with clients, which most of our revenue comes from hours that we work, hours that we bill to clients. And I thought it would decrease it, but actually what it's doing is it's giving us more power to where I think we're actually increasing the amount of hours and the amount that clients are paying us, because now hour for hour, we're able to do so much more with AI. So it's like, our rates have stayed the same. Our hourly rates have stayed the same, but within an hour of work now, you're getting so much more from it that now now clients are wanting more. So it's been the opposite of what I thought. I'm a big believer in creative destruction. If those of you that have read the book Innovator's Dilemma, and I think it's Jeffrey Moore is the author, it talks about creative destruction and how, you want to constantly try to, I'm paraphrasing, I may not be doing a good job, but the concept of creative destruction is I want to create my own or destroy my own business model. I want to destroy my own business and replace it with something better, because if I don't, someone else will. And that's the whole premise behind it. And so that's the way we've embraced AI is let's embrace AI as a disruptor and disrupt our business ourselves. And I think that's what a lot of companies are doing. The only problem is when they roll out AI, a lot of companies are just trying to replace humans, and they're failing at it. You look at Starbucks and Ford are two big companies that have recently failed pretty miserably and pretty catastrophically on a big scale with their AI solutions. And in both cases, I think they were trying to replace, or in the case of Starbucks, I don't think they were trying to replace humans, but they were trying to certainly make their jobs easier and automate a lot of their jobs, or at least the part that wasn't customer facing. Where at Ford just tried to, they laid off like 350 quality engineers, rolled out a new quality AI tool to replace them, and the tool failed, and they hired back the 350 engineers, which is a total slap in the face for everyone involved, I would assume. So no, I have not yet seen it be successful. I'd love to hear from the audience. Has anyone seen AI be successful at replacing humans? Because I have not seen anything even close to it. We finally have an answer to the mysterious LinkedIn user that I didn't have a name for. It is Ellie Hay. So thank you, Ellie, for clarifying who you were. I don't know why your name's not showing up here. You're the only one too. It's like I can see everyone's name, but for some reason yours wasn't showing up here. So thanks for being here. So let's get into just as we sort of bring this all full circle. Let's talk about the underlying condition here, and then what leaders can actually do about shadow IT. So first of all, I guess I'd leave you with, or start with, some bad news, just to get it out of the way. And that is that no platform that exists today is going to solve this shadow IT problem. In fact, the technology is probably going to make it worse, because technology is changing so fast, or businesses are changing fast. It's just going to constantly create an opportunity for more shadow IT. So again, I think the key here is rather than say, you know what, we don't want shadow IT, let's get rid of it all. It's more back to the point of whoever mentioned it a few minutes ago about understanding, what is it? Why does the shadow IT exist? And let's understand that before we just scold it. And so that's probably the key, is to understand it, and then understand too that if you change or get rid of it, you need to make sure you're not losing the IP. I keep calling it IP because I think it's important to think about it from a corporate asset perspective, because this is your corporate data. Even though it's not pretty, it's sitting in a spreadsheet on someone's laptop. It still is your data. It's your corporate data. You should treat it as such. It's an asset, something that helps you run your business. May not show up on your balance sheet, may not have a monetary value, but it is intellectual property. It's you own that. And so to want to throw it out that's reckless. And I understand why companies and leaders want to do it. But they also have to look at the reality of it is you don't want to throw the baby out with bathwater and get rid of the technology, or get rid of the knowledge altogether. So, we have to understand the math and the science and the behavioral component here, which is that individuals can build their own workarounds a lot faster than the organization is able to deliver a sanctioned and approved centralized IT solution. And that's just the reality. So if you might say, okay, we're going to go implement, we were talking about SAP and Microsoft a minute ago. So we're going to implement SAP or Microsoft here. It's going to take us 2 or 3 years. Well, what are people going to do in the 2 or 3 years you're rolling that out? They're not going to stand still. They're going to keep building shadow IT to help run the business in the meantime. And then it's probably going to be even harder to get that out of the operations, because chances are pretty high that the company implemented the ERP system in a way that didn't take into consideration this new shadow IT that's emerging while the software is being built. So we're in a fast changing world. It's not pretty. It's never going to be pretty. We have to stop pretending it is going to be pretty and that some silver bullet is going to solve all of our problems. We just have to understand that this is all changing faster than it's ever changed, and it's going to create more shadow IT. And so that is just the reality. And so we can complain about it and be sold promises from software vendors and big system integrators and big fancy consultants that are telling us all that, their solution or these modern future-proof solutions are going to solve all of our problems. It's just not true. And so I would go so far as to say this is a trigger for people too. I found in this industry, if you haven't been able to tell, there's a sick part of me that enjoys triggering this industry, because I think the industry needs to be triggered, because it's just so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not an ethical industry. It's not a industry that is serving its customers well. And I think it's time that we trigger the industry and call a spade and say the quiet parts out loud. And I think one of the things that is not said often is that for all this talk of technical debt and how we're going to put new systems in place that are going to eliminate technical debt and future proof our operations in the future, we're actually just creating more technical debt right now. So if you're implementing SAP or Microsoft or whatever it is, that's great. You're taking a step forward, but that today's implementation is just tomorrow's technical debt. And so rather than viewing it as a silver bullet that eliminates technical debt and future proofs our business, that's the other one. The future proof term is so misleading. You are not future proofing anything. All you're doing is you're upgrading your systems. You're improving. You're taking steps forward, hopefully, but no one's future proof. First of all, second of all, that will eventually become tomorrow's technical debt. So this is a contrarian view that I know is going to annoy a lot of people in my industry, and that is that today's implementation is tomorrow's technical debt. Two of the most effective phrases in enterprise software sales are eliminating your technical debt and future-proofing your business. They're both extremely misleading, and they work beautifully together to accomplish the goal of selling more software. So technical debt frames everything you currently have as a liability that you're obligated to pay off. And the only way to pay it off is to buy new software. That's very convenient if you're a software vendor or a system integrator that makes money from the software vendors. The term future-proof implies that there's an end state, a version of your business where we finally found that future solution where we're finally done, we're finally protected, we're finally insulated from all this change that's been disrupting our business. That doesn't exist. The term future proof is even worse than technical debt, in my opinion, because nobody is future proof. The system you implement this year is going to be someone's legacy problems in 8 or 10 years or however long. And someone will stand in the conference room and call it technical debt at some point in the future. So we all know we're going to look back at 2026 as like the old days when we had this old technology. I don't know what it'll be in 2036, but we will, without doubt, look back at 2026 as the past. It's history. It's technical debt. That's stuff that we now need to replace. So it's not future-proof. Let's just stop calling it future-proof, because we are not future-proof. None of us ever will be, even with AI, even with cloud systems. It's not reality. So this is why the shadow IT cycle never ends, because you implement a modern platform. It works pretty well on day one if you're one of the few lucky ones that can get it to work reasonably well on day one. But even then, your business drifts over time. The gap opens. People start filling the gap with workarounds. Eventually, someone declares the whole environment full of technical debt and shadow IT and sells you the next platform. It's a repeat cycle. So it's been happening for 30 years. It'll continue to happen for another 30 years. So I'm not saying don't modernize. You absolutely should, but upgrading is a progress. It's a process. So you want to go in with clear eyes and set your expectations accordingly, because you're not buying a permanent solution. You're just buying a better starting point. You are modernizing. You are moving towards the future, but you still won't stand still. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind. So the leaders that understand that can make dramatically better decisions than the ones who believe they're buying the last system they ever need. Because the second group always overpays, overpromises to their board, and underplans for the drift that's coming. We also don't want to fool ourselves into thinking that we'll put this system into place, we'll get rid of shadow IT, get rid of technical debt, we'll future-proof our operations, and we'll be good to go. I mean, it's a promise and a dream that doesn't exist, that's been sold in this industry for decades. I personally find that it's getting old. I'm getting tired of hearing it, but it's working. So I think as a buyer, you just have to understand the reality and the limitations of what you might be deploying here today. Hello to John Starks on YouTube with a clappy hand emoji. Thanks for being here. I'm glad you enjoy the content here. Dostonian on YouTube says, do you fully understand what's in your AI created spreadsheets? I think the human would become detached as AI builds much like a manager trusts the staff, but AI hallucinates and lies willingly. Great question. I think you do have to ask that. You can build all these cool spreadsheets now that may or may not function the way you want them to. So that's another layer. So now you've got shadow IT on shadow IT. And if the humans step too far out of the way, that can get real messy real fast. This is from Mohammed on LinkedIn. Mohammed says AI and cloud ERP certainly offer many benefits, but how do organizations determine whether the additional investment in AI will deliver sufficient business value and ROI for their current needs? Um, it's a good question. I don't know that I haven't seen companies that have been able to clearly answer this question yet. We're helping several clients right now through their AI strategies and helping them implement AI solutions. But if we're being candid here, it's too early to know with any certainty or any reasonable estimation of how this is going to impact operations in businesses. We don't have the historic data, that we've had in the past of being able to point to past ERP implementations, thousands of them, and being able to point to them and say, well, you can reduce your inventory by X amount because we've seen it work with other companies. We don't have that track record of reliable data, so I don't know that we really can. Now, I think there will be an ROI. I think there is an ROI, but just what exactly it is, it's we can make reasonable estimates. I suppose. I mean, that is something that we are doing with our clients, but even then, it's not really proven until you prove it. And so I think that's the tricky part or the hard part of all this. This is from John Starks on YouTube. It says Cloud Shadow IT help deploy a sovereign system like Shadow Database Backup to help avoid data captivity from software vendors. So it's a question. I'm sorry, I misread that. Could Shadow IT help deploy a sovereign system like a Shadow Database Backup to help avoid data captivity from software vendors? This is a whole nother can of worms that I appreciate you bringing up because it is very relevant to this. We could actually have spent the entire hour on this topic, and that is data captivity from software vendors / vendor lock / data ownership. Increasingly, companies are deferring or relegating their ownership and control of data. They're passing that on to their vendors, and part of that is through strong arm tactics of the software vendors and the system integrators that they work with. Some of it is self-inflicted. Some of it is because leaders are agreeing to this. But it is interesting. I mean, the beauty of Shadow IT, even though, again, there might be more net negative than there is net positive with Shadow IT, and some of you may stand by that, and that's okay. But the reality is that the good thing with Shadow IT is you have complete control of that data. It may be inaccurate. It may be error prone. It may be inefficient. It may be hard to scale, but at least you own it. At least you don't have to worry about a vendor limiting how you can or can't use it. Now, of course, the counter argument to that is, well, yeah, but now you've got all these cybersecurity issues. You've got data integrity issues. If that person leaves and takes the spreadsheet with them or the knowledge of the spreadsheet, then you lose that. That's fair. Those are fair arguments. But for some organizations, the bigger risk is actually giving up control of data, giving up control of their systems. And that's the real backlash I think we're going to see in this industry. Is I think this whole movement towards cloud ERP, agentic AI residing in cloud ERP, the data all being in cloud ERP, the leverage is shifting very dramatically to where the software vendors have all the pricing power and the leverage in the commercial relationship. And there's just going to be a backlash on that. I just think right now, the cloud ERP vendors and AI software providers are so hell-bent on building up their annual recurring revenue base because that's how they get valued as a company and that's how they get compensated. The executives are getting compensated based on how much cloud revenue they can build. So they're in this mad dash to build up as much cloud revenue as they can. And along with that is coming commercial terms that are very favorable to the software vendors and disadvantageous to the customers. And that's a reckoning that's on the horizon. I'm sure of it. Like, I just know there's going to be a reckoning and a backlash against all this movement to the cloud, because now companies are going to look up one day and say, wow, I'm spending a lot of money on cloud ERP. I'm spending a ton of money on agentic AI based on consumption and tokenization, all that stuff. I don't have any leverage now. I mean, because what am I going to do? Rip the system out and replace it with a new one? That's too disruptive and too costly. So I'm going to just suck it up and pay the higher price to this vendor for a certain amount of time until something breaks, or until we reach a tipping point, I guess you could say. So that's what you really have to be careful of if you're a leader, is how far in to doubling down on a single ERP vendor that controls everything and has all the leverage in the commercial relationship. That's what you have to ask yourself. And so that's why I'm such a big believer in composable ERP and microservices, as PCG mentioned a minute ago. I believe in that stuff because I think it gives the power back and it keeps the power back where it belongs, which is with customers, with end customers. I don't think big technology, big vendors, SIs, they should not be controlling your business. And that's why we exist as a company, is because we are helping our clients navigate that. And I view us as not just selling consulting services and expertise, but we're selling control and ownership. That's what we sell. And we sell trust too, because we're not trying to sell anything or force technology down people's throats. And so really good points. I think the data captivity thing is a real big deal. And I think that is something that is a positive, a net benefit for Shadow IT. So one thing I haven't mentioned yet that's really important that I want to make sure everyone is invited to, that is that we are having our Digital Stratosphere Conference September 9th through 11th in Denver, Colorado. You can scan this QR code right here, and it'll take you to the event page. You can see the speakers, the agenda, all that stuff, all the different pricing options for attending. You can attend in person. If you can be in Denver, that's ideal, but you can also join remotely via internet. And so we'll have virtual passes as well as in-person passes available. I'll be presenting my new book, or summarizing my new book, which is called Welcome to the Machine. You can see it over my shoulder behind me. I'll be presenting a keynote on that presentation. And we'll have a lot of different speakers there, so I encourage you to be there. So you can scan the QR code right there in front of you, or for those of you on TikTok, or those of you listening to the audio only platform, you can go to the links in the show notes below, or just go to stratosphere2026.com, and it'll take you to the page where you can learn more. So check that out. It's coming up September 9th through 11th. It's a really good event. It's tech agnostic. We have a lot of different speakers there that will be presenting really cool stuff. So I hope to see you all there. So that's what I've got for you today. I want to thank you for today's great conversation. I really appreciate everyone joining here today. Really good comments and questions, and love to hear more from you on this topic.